Welcome back, Nightmare Hunters. And if you're new here, a huge welcome to the HOA Nightmare Files, your ultimate destination for jaw-dropping true stories of HOA overreach and the epic battles against it. Before we dive into today's unbelievable tale, I want to hear from you. Where are you watching from? Drop your location in the comments below. And while you're down there, make sure you hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you're always the first to find out when our latest HOA nightmare hits the screen. All right, let's get into this video. My family ranch, The Last Stand, has been around for 5 generations. It's more than just a place on a map. It's a living, breathing testament to independence. Sprawling across 2,000 acres of sun-baked fields, dense whispering pines, and rugged, dusty trails, it's a world away from the manicured lawns and meticulously planned communities that dot the landscape further east. Here, the silence is so profound, you can hear a coyote yawn 3 valleys over, and the only traffic is the lowing of cattle and the occasional rumble of my old pickup truck. We're deep in the county, miles from any city limit, and an entire universe away from the nearest suburban HOA. The only HOA I've ever recognized out here is the Hoot Owl Association that nests in the ancient oaks by the creek. I'm a private man, always have been. I like my space, the honest work of ranching, and the quiet rhythm of the land. I prefer the company of my loyal ranch dog, Hank, a grizzled old border collie with more wisdom in his eyes than most people accumulate in a lifetime to any crowded gathering. I'm not one for grand gestures, never have been, but life, as it often does, has a funny way of throwing unexpected curveballs, sometimes disguised as meticulously coiffed women with an insatiable appetite for control. This particular storm didn't roll in from the west, bringing thunder and much-needed rain. No, this one originated from the east, carried on the saccharine sweet winds of pure, unadulterated entitlement. And believe me, this storm had a name: Karen. Karen Miller, president of the Lakeside Ridge Homeowners Association. Lakeside Ridge Estates was, by suburban standards, an immaculate development. Every lawn was scalped to precisely 1.5 inches. Every mailbox was the same approved shade of muted beige, and every rose bush was pruned with surgical precision. Their bylaws probably dictated the exact angle of sunlight allowed to fall upon your begonias. Karen, with her perfectly sculpted eyebrows, like tiny angry caterpillars planning world domination, ran the place with an iron fist wrapped in a velvet glove. Or perhaps more accurately, a surgical glove, given her obsession with control. Their development bordered our easternmost fence line, not our actual property line, mind you, but the very edge of their sprawling concrete kingdom. For years, these two disparate worlds, the wild independence of the ranch and the rigid conformity of the suburb, had coexisted in an uneasy truce, separated by a stretch of rugged, untouched land that served as a natural buffer. But Karen, she had a vision, a grand, glorious, utterly delusional vision of expansion. Her gaze was fixed firmly on my ranch, seeing not a working cattle operation, but an untapped gold mine of future HOA dues and pristine, standardized lots. It began subtly, almost innocently. Flyers started appearing in our mailbox, addressed to future Lakeside Ridge residents. They detailed community pool hours, upcoming bake sales, and architectural guidelines for modifications that we, clearly, had no business adhering to. We just tossed them into the recycling bin, a bemused shrug being our only reaction. Then came the phone calls, polite at first, from a perky HOA secretary inquiring about potential development opportunities for mutual benefit. My polite but firm, "No thank you, the ranch is not for sale," was, it seemed, interpreted not as a definitive refusal, but as a negotiating tactic. The pleasantries, thin as they were, vanished quicker than a whisper in a dust storm. Then came the calls insistent, the mailings more aggressive. We started receiving official notices warning of nuisance animal citations if my cattle dared to graze too close to their perfectly paved roads. The absurdity of it was almost comical. My cattle, whose ancestors had roamed these lands long before the first cul-de-sac was ever dreamed up, were now a nuisance. Then came the drone, a sleek, buzzing irritant that hovered over my pastures like an overgrown, irritating mosquito, its camera lens presumably zooming in on every loose fence post or errant tumbleweed. I just watched it, calmly, from the shade of my porch, Hank snoozing at my feet. The fox surveyed its surroundings with the cunning intelligence of a seasoned trickster. I was observing, absorbing, learning their tactics. I wasn't reacting, not yet. The first direct incursion was a land surveyor, complete with an HOA-branded safety vest, looking utterly out of place amidst the tall grass and scrub brush. He was setting up a tripod deep inside my south pasture. He claimed he was verifying boundary lines for the new community expansion. He was about half a mile past my actual boundary and a quarter mile past even what their fanciful map suggested. I walked out, slowly, Hank by my side. The surveyor, a pale, nervous-looking fellow, looked startled when he finally noticed us. He straightened up, clutching his clipboard like a shield. "Can I help you, sir?" he stammered. "Son," I said, my voice low but firm, "you're about half a mile into my property. I'd suggest you pack up your toys and leave before Hank decides you're an unauthorized squirrel." Hank, sensing the tension, let out a low, grumbling growl, a sound that always made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up, and it clearly had the same effect on the surveyor. He stammered something about eminent domain and community development plans. I just pointed to Hank again, who punctuated his displeasure with another, deeper growl. The surveyor's eyes darted from Hank to me, then back to his expensive equipment. He decided discretion was definitely the better part of valor, quickly packing up and scuttling back towards the HOA's manicured domain. That little incident must have sent Karen into a veritable frenzy. A week later, a full-blown cease and desist order arrived via certified mail. It wasn't just a threat, it was a demand. It ordered me to immediately cease illegal agricultural operations and to prepare my entire property for annexation into the Lakeside Ridge Homeowners Association. It detailed a terrifying litany of potential consequences, escalating fines, property liens, and ultimately a forced sale of my ancestral land if I didn't comply within 30 days. It was signed by Karen, of course, her signature a flourish of self-importance, and by their HOA attorney, a man named Sterling Vance. Sterling was a city slicker, all sharp suits and slicked back hair, whose confidence was worn like a slightly ill-fitting toupee, noticeable but doing its job until you got close enough to see the cracks. The letter was utterly preposterous. My ranch predated their entire development by over a century. There were absolutely no legal grounds for such an annexation. But Karen and her ilk operated on a principle of pure audacity, a belief that if they just shouted loud enough, with enough official-sounding jargon, their fabrications would somehow morph into legitimate law. They were like a child throwing a tantrum, believing sheer volume could make reality bend to their will. They didn't know who they were dealing with. They saw a quiet, unassuming rancher, a simple man with dirt under his fingernails and straw in his hair. They likely assumed I was uneducated, easily intimidated, or too rural to understand their sophisticated legal maneuvers. What they didn't know, couldn't possibly have known, was that before I inherited the last stand and embraced the quiet life of ranching, I spent 20 years arguing cases in state and federal courts. I wasn't just a rancher, I was a retired land use attorney, and a damn good one, with a reputation for dissecting complex legal documents and uncovering obscure but devastating precedents. My specialty? Property rights and jurisdictional disputes. It was almost too perfect. I dusted off my old, worn legal texts, the spines softened by years of use, and began my own deep dive. The smell of aged paper and leather brought back memories of late nights, endless research, and the thrill of uncovering a critical piece of information that could swing an entire case. I meticulously cross-referenced their absurd claims with county records, state statutes, and even obscure federal land grants dating back to the turn of the last century. Every bylaw they cited, Every ordinance they misquoted, I traced it back to its origin. It was all there, laid out like breadcrumbs to their inevitable downfall. The Lakeside Ridge HOA was established in 1998 under County Ordinance 237B. That ordinance, clear as a mountain spring, stipulated its exact jurisdictional limits. It clearly defined the HOA's boundary as the eastern bank of the Cottonwood Creek. My property, as documented by an original land grant from 1888, lay entirely on the western bank of that very creek, a natural, undeniable boundary that had existed for over a century. Furthermore, their own HOA's charter, specifically Article 3, Section 2, stated that any expansion of jurisdiction required a unanimous vote of all existing homeowners and written consent from any affected adjacent landowners. They had neither, not even close. Karen's smile was plastered on, a cheap veneer over a house of cards, and I was about to blow on it with the full force of federal law. Their next move, oblivious to the legal trap they were stepping into, was even bolder. They sent out glossy invitations for a community vision meeting at the Lakeside Ridge Clubhouse, open to all prospective new residents of the expanded Lakeside Ridge estates. The invitation included a beautifully rendered, utterly fictional map with my entire 2,000 acres outlined in bold red strokes, proudly labeled Future Residential Zone. It was a public declaration of war, a grand theatrical gesture to legitimize their land grab. They intended to vote on the annexation, treating my ancestral land as if it were a vacant lot ripe for the taking. I saw the invitation, chuckled quietly, and began preparing my ambush. I contacted a few old colleagues, discreetly, not for advice, but for logistical support. A federal judge I'd once clerked for, a former prosecutor I'd shared many a courtroom battle with. I wouldn't reveal my hand prematurely. Karen was about to learn a very hard lesson about underestimating the quiet man. The day of the meeting arrived. The Lakeside Ridge Clubhouse, usually a beacon of suburban serenity, was buzzing with an almost manic energy. It was packed to the gills with curious homeowners, eager potential buyers, and a smattering of local reporters drawn by the sensational headlines Karen had undoubtedly spun. Karen herself was at the podium, basking in the spotlight, looking every inch the benevolent dictator, flanked by Sterling Vance, who looked smug and self-assured. She started with a flowery, self-congratulatory speech about community betterment, sustainable growth, and the inevitable march of progress. She painted my working ranch as an archaic eyesore, a barrier to their utopian vision, a blot on the pristine landscape. She truly had a knack for attracting every mosquito in a 5-mile radius, and right now she was drawing every self-important busybody, every aspiring HOA president, and every gossip-hungry citizen in the county. When it came time for the public input section, a mere formality, she surely thought, I stood up from the back row. A hush fell over the room as eyes turned to me, the man in the worn jeans and plain button-up shirt, a stranger in their perfectly coiffed world. Karen looked visibly surprised. She hadn't expected me to show. "Mr. Caldwell," she said, a hint of patronizing disdain in her voice, barely concealing her irritation. "I assume you're here to discuss the terms of your relocation. We have a very generous buyout package we could discuss after the vote." "Not quite, Karen," I replied, my voice calm but carrying effortlessly through the hushed room, resonating with an authority that had nothing to do with volume. "I'm here to clarify the terms of your cessation." A ripple of confused murmurs through the crowd. Sterling Vance, who had been idly polishing his expensive watch, stiffened, his eyes narrowing. Karen's carefully constructed veneer cracked a little, a hairline fracture appearing in her perfect smile. "I beg your pardon," she huffed, her carefully composed facade beginning to crumble. "The Lakeside Ridge Homeowners Association," I began, pulling a thick, meticulously organized binder from my old canvas bag, the kind of binder that screams legal documentation even to the untrained eye. Was established in 1998 under County Ordinance 237B. That ordinance, which I have here, fully certified and stamped by the county clerk's office just yesterday, clearly and unequivocally stipulates its jurisdictional limits. It defines the HOA's boundary as the eastern bank of the Cottonwood Creek. My property, as you can see from this original land grant from 1888, also fully certified and recorded, lies entirely on the western bank of that creek. I held up 2 maps, laminated and clear as day, showing the definitive, unmoving boundary. Now, let's talk about your HOA's charter, specifically Article 3, Section 2. It plainly states that any expansion of jurisdiction requires a unanimous vote of all existing homeowners and written consent from any affected adjacent landowners. Tell me, Karen, do you have my written consent? Because as the sole owner of the Last Stand Ranch, I assure you, you do not. Nor, I believe, do you have the unanimous vote, because several homeowners present here today, I gestured subtly to a small, nervous group in the front row, have already privately expressed their extreme displeasure with your tyrannical methods and your reckless disregard for established property rights. In fact, some of them have even signed affidavits to that effect. Karen's face was turning a shade of purple usually reserved for bruised plums. Sterling Vance, who had moments ago been a picture of arrogance, suddenly looked very, very small, his face ashen. He glanced at Karen, a look of dawning horror on his face. He knew. He clearly knew I had cornered them. But that's not the real ambush, is it? I paused, letting the silence stretch, letting the weight of my words sink into the stunned audience. You see, Karen, your HOA, in its rush to expand its dominion and secure this future residential zone, my land, by the way, recently secured a rather substantial loan, a multi-million-dollar loan collateralized by the HOA's existing assets based on fraudulent representations of future property acquisition. That, my friends, I turned to the utterly silent audience, my voice now carrying a cold, steely edge, is bank fraud. And attempting to illegally seize private land under false pretenses, that's not just a civil matter, folks. That's a federal felony. And I held up a final document, pristine white, against the dark binder. This, ladies and gentlemen, issued just this morning, is a federal injunction. It's addressed to the Lakeside Ridge Homeowners Association, and specifically to its president, Karen Miller. It freezes all assets of the Lakeside Ridge Homeowners Association effective immediately, pending a full federal investigation into allegations of fraud, misrepresentation, and attempted extortion. And, perhaps most pertinently, it contains a warrant for the immediate arrest of one Karen Miller, the president of said HOA, for multiple counts of felony fraud and abuse of power. Before anyone, least of all Karen, could react, the heavy double doors at the back of the clubhouse swung open with a soft thud. 2 figures, tall and imposing, walked in. Federal marshals, looking stoic, official, and utterly unamused. They scanned the room, their eyes falling directly on me, and I gave them a small, almost imperceptible nod. Then, with an almost predatory grace, they walked straight towards the podium. Karen gasped, a small, choked sound. Her perfectly sculpted eyebrows seemed to deflate, losing their imperial stiffness. Sterling Vance, who moments ago had been a picture of arrogance, suddenly looked very, very small, his face ashen. He glanced at Karen, a look of dawning horror on his face. He knew. He clearly knew I had cornered them. "This is outrageous! You can't!" Karen shrieked, her voice cracking. her carefully cultivated composure shattering into 1,000 pieces. One of the marshals, a stern-faced woman, held up the warrant, its official seal prominent. "Karen Miller, you are under arrest." She tried to resist, muttering about legal counsel, about this being a misunderstanding, about how she was just trying to improve the community. But her words were hollow, fading into the stunned silence of the room. Her house of cards, built on a foundation of lies and entitlement, had spectacularly collapsed, not with a bang, but with the quiet, authoritative click of handcuffs. As they led her out, past her utterly stunned homeowners, past the flashing cameras of the local reporters, she looked directly at me. The sheer, naked realization of her total defeat, the crushing weight of her miscalculation, was etched on her face. It was the look of someone who thought they were playing chess against a novice, only to discover their opponent was a grand master who not only owned the board, the pieces, the tournament hall, and every rule in the game. I didn't win because I fought harder. I won because I never let her decide the game in the first place. The story of the grand HOA annexation became local legend, a cautionary tale whispered in every subdivision meeting across the county. The Lakeside Ridge HOA was utterly dismantled. Its assets were frozen, meticulously investigated, and eventually used to pay restitution for the damages and legal fees incurred. A new, far more reasonable community association eventually formed from the wreckage, but they never, ever, even considered venturing beyond their established boundaries. The memory of Karen's downfall, a fresh and potent deterrent. My ranch, the last stand, remains untouched, a steadfast beacon of independence. The only bells are cowbells, the only rules are nature's, and the only enforcement comes from a good fence, a loyal dog, and the deep, silent understanding that this land belongs to those who respect it. Sometimes justice isn't about screaming the loudest or throwing the biggest tantrum. It's about knowing the rules better than the bully, playing the long game, and watching them realize in that single crushing moment that you never let them decide the game in the first place. If you enjoyed this tale of Karen getting her just desserts, then like and subscribe and click that bell to find out about our newest videos as soon as we upload them. Let me know in the comments if Karen and the HOA got what they deserved. How would you have handled it? Don't forget to let us know where you are watching from. We have something that I think you will really enjoy next time, but until then, avoid Karens and have a fantastic day.